So welcome everyone. We are very pleased to be hosting this webinar today. We know everyone is going through a lot in adjusting to this new and very unusual situation we're in. We hope to be able to answer your questions, and we know you have many. We are very excited about what we're about to share because it's, although it's a challenging time, it turns out to be a time of great innovation for us. And we are doing our best to move as quickly as we can to implement some solutions for remote testing so that you, as you scramble to learn how to use distance learning, will also be able to do distance testing. So please, if you can, I see many of you have posted your name, your state, your role, and your email in the chat box, and thank you for that. We have 300 people on the call today, and so I will ask you if you could please hold off on posting questions in the chat box until we ask for them. Make it just a note if you want to, so you don't forget, but I'm just afraid with so many people on the call that if you post them, we may not be able to find them when I am going to pause periodically and we'll ask for questions then. So if you could hold off, I think that will be more efficient. And even then, with so many of you, we may not be able to respond to all of your questions during the call. So if we cannot get to your question, we will definitely check our chat box, and we will make sure that we respond later to any questions that you have. So that way I think it'll be a little bit more efficient. And just so you know, and anyone in your network, that we are recording the webinar, and the PowerPoint will also be in the news and updates webinar section of our CASAS website. So that will be there as soon as we can process it and get it to you. So that's how we know this is a topic of great interest to everyone. And so we are, there are many ways to share it, and this is one live today, but then you'll be able to see the recording by tomorrow, no later than tomorrow. Our agenda for today is that we're going to focus on our remote testing plans. We're going to give an overview. We're going to talk about phase 1, 2, and 3. And just to make it clear from the outset that we are doing some clinical tryouts now, and then starting May 4th in about 2 weeks, we will be rolling it out, but we will be doing that in a very organized way, and I'll be explaining more about that. And we have a phase 3, which we'll describe. There will be I will have to stop during the presentation to see if there are questions, but then at the end, there will be time also for you to ask questions and make comments. And then we'll let you know about next steps. So the overview, we want to begin by sharing with you the context of this at the moment, and that begins with the U.S. Department of Education, OCTAE. They have given guidance about distance learning, as I'm sure you know, but also about distance testing, or what we're calling remote testing. And the most recent one was on last Friday, and this is where they have really very clearly stated that states have flexibility. They have flexibility about whether they're going to offer distance learning and testing and how much of it. So I really want to emphasize to all of you that at the moment it is a state decision about whether to decide to do remote testing. And states may, if they decide to simply just allow local programs to exempt their students who are enrolled in distance education programs from pre and post testing, that is very much an option. So we met with states on Monday, and we explained this to them. And so I want to emphasize today that for everything I'm saying, I hope it will be clear, but it will be very important for you all to check with your state to find out what the state policy is about remote testing, whether it's permitted, whether it's permitted but with certain stipulations. So that really is something I want to make clear, that it does flow from the state level to decide about doing remote testing. So we're going to tell you about it, but we would not be able to allow you to participate unless we have already heard from your state that it's something that the state is allowing. Now, there's also a provision that OCTAE has asked for. They're asking states to specify the time frame for this COVID-19 related exemptions, if there are exemptions, and identify students who are exempted from testing during that time. So if there is no pre and post testing with NRS approved tests, this will be something that you will likely be asked to document at the local level as far as who you would have tested, but you cannot because of the COVID-19 crisis. OCTAE also gave some guidance, this was on March 27th, about what the test publishers are going to be needing to specify and for you to follow about remote testing. Because as you know, these NRS approved tests go through a long process to be approved. And so there are publisher guidelines to follow to ensure that the student is identified and is clearly that student, because you're not going to be in person with remote testing. We need additional measures to determine that that student is who they say they are. The test security is of utmost importance in many respects, and I'll be talking about some of the ways that we're going to try to safeguard that. And then remote proctor training is something that must be there as well, because giving the tests remotely requires additional understanding and procedures. On April 9th, OCTAE met with all of the test publishers of NRS approved tests for adult education. Then on the 17th of April, CASAS alone met with OCTAE, and it was then last Friday that we got permission to roll out remote testing. And we will brag a bit to say that OCTAE was quite impressed with our remote testing plan and timeline. So we are also feeling very good about what we have been able to come up with so far. And we will also be evolving our plan and procedures as we go, as we learn more. We did conduct a webinar on Monday, as I just mentioned. And so that we had 30 representatives from 30 states on that webinar. And that was to inform the state directors and state level staff about them, about our remote testing plans. And some of you, I imagine, on this call today may also be at the state level, so welcome if you are here as well. Let's talk about benefits of remote testing. One is that it would allow your program to continue services. That would be either to post-test to get measurable skill gains, or if you're getting new students, which we have heard that many of you are because of the high unemployment, and that students have, or our adult learners have time now to study, so they're coming to you to learn English, to upgrade their basic skills or learn skills. So pre-testing to get a baseline score for NRS reporting is something you might want to be doing, as well as getting placement information from a pre-test in order to guide your distance learning instruction. Another benefit of remote testing is that you will be able to develop the capacity to test distance learners, and that's been a challenge so far. We've been able to offer distance learning, blended learning models, but we haven't, until now, worked out ways and means of doing remote testing in a secure fashion. So that is something that is happening as we speak, and this will add flexibility to your assessment options. So the third bullet here is basically to say, and I think this may be something you've already realized, but we are certainly aware of it now, that remote testing is the wave of the future for distance learning. And it is very exciting, but it also has there are a lot of considerations, and we are proceeding cautiously, but we are proceeding, and want to share with you where we're going with it. But it's important to remember that there are many challenges associated with it. One is access to technology by both the proctor and the student. So that there are two aspects of this. One is in terms of the devices that they have access to and that are appropriate for these pre and post tests. So just to say, get it right out of the way, that smartphones are all too small to display the test questions and displays on our tests. So the only exception might potentially be with the level B and C listening, where it's all oral. But generally speaking, smartphones are not possible. So in order for students to participate from home in remote testing, they would have to have devices that are appropriate. The second consideration technology-wise is internet bandwidth. There are many considerations for this, but one of them may be that others in their household may be also online, having K-12 learners with doing Zoom classes and so many, or others working from home. So there may be competition for that precious bandwidth. The testing environment at a student's home may lack privacy, or it may be noisy. So it may be difficult for them to establish a quiet place to test that they wouldn't be distracted. Another challenge is that there are many new procedures that both the proctors and the students will need to learn in order to do remote testing. And that's unavoidable. I'm sure we are working out the kinks actually as we speak. We're doing clinical tryouts this week, but it is still more than just walking into a test center, sitting down in front of a computer and taking the test. So there is more involved, and that does add to the challenges. Proctor training is something that is a must because there are additional requirements, and so that is something that we are preparing now. We're going to tell you a little more about that in a minute. Test security, as I mentioned, is extremely important in every way, and protecting the security of the test is something that, of course, we as the test publisher is concerned about, but you as a local program or as a state level person, of course, also need to worry about test security, because if while doing this we compromise the test, then we are all in trouble. Equity concerns is something else to consider. That can have to do with the access to technology or other aspects of equity. So something else that I'm sure you may be talking about at the local and state levels already. All right, so what is the CASAS approach to remote testing? We began by researching. We know there are many third-party vendors around, ProctorU, Examity, Pearson's OnView. There are a number of them, and we have talked to a number of them, and some of them have what are called AI, or artificial intelligence solutions. We've looked into those, and we know there are a number of video platforms out there, and we've looked into a number of those. We have talked to state directors and state level staff. We have interviewed practitioners who are familiar with distance learning, and all of this to get your insights and learn from you. We've weighed multiple factors. Cost is a big one. We know that in the field of adult ed, there are many cost constraints, and that has to be a topmost consideration. The technology constraints for both the proctors and students, test security, always there. Ease of implementation, and also the urgency to begin this quickly. So this is not something that any of us planned for, but we are definitely in it, and we are all trying our best to work out quick solutions. Now, in terms of our test security measures, what we have decided on in our initial rollout is that we are insisting on live proctoring as opposed to just a recording. So it must be that the proctor is in real time with the student. And initially, we're insisting on one-on-one. Now, as soon as we can work out solutions where it's one to many, but not very many, but one to some, then we will make those available. But at the outset, we are limiting it to one proctor, one student live. We are asking you to record the test sessions, and that is because it provides an additional measure of test security. It documents what happens, and it helps us also at this stage to understand how to possibly improve the process and procedures. We are developing testing agreements for remote testing at the agency level. So if a local program wants to do remote testing, they would need to submit an additional agency remote testing agreement with certain assurances and letting us know how they're going to go about it. The proctor will have to go through training for remote testing and have a certification to document that they have done that. And the student will be agreeing to things that will happen during the test that will be done verbally, where they'll have to agree, of course, not to share information or test items or any of the other things that we would be on the lookout for. In terms of cost, as of course we know that cost is an issue for you, so we are looking for solutions with minimal costs and with video conferencing and CASAS e-test software. As I mentioned, we have looked into third-party vendor solutions, but so far what we've seen is they are, relatively speaking, for our population and program budgets, expensive. So we continue to be looking into that, and we will let you know if we can find any solutions that look tenable. In terms of delivery, one of the requirements, excuse me, is that existing e-test proctors would be delivering this. So in order to embark on remote testing, you would have to be a program that's already using CASAS e-tests and that has certified e-test proctors. And they would have to have additional remote test training. CASAS remote testing can only be delivered via CASAS e-tests, not paper tests. So this may seem obvious to some of you, but we have had this question. So we want to really emphasize that remote testing can only occur, CASAS remote testing can only occur in the context of CASAS e-tests and not with CASAS paper tests. Now, if you are not doing remote testing following our procedures, then the usual requirements apply, and that is a proctor, a physical proctor must be physically present to administer all CASAS tests. And I will say that we have been hearing some creative solutions in the field, testing in cars in parking lots, or some programs that do have their test center open and are doing social distancing. So there may be ways, even during this crisis, to do physical testing, but in a very careful and appropriate way. So if you are doing that, that's fine, but a proctor must always be there. So as I mentioned, we have 3 phases. We are starting this week with our clinical tryouts. and initial pilots. And in this, we are limiting it to Zoom. As I mentioned, we have looked at other video conferencing platforms, but in this very early phase of rollout, we are limiting it to Zoom because that makes it easier for us to come up with clear guidelines for how to do it. Now, I know that one-on-one is very labor intensive and therefore expensive. And so that's something that we're well aware of. But given the conditions and situations on which we're needing to roll this out safely, this is what we are rolling out to begin with. And as I mentioned earlier, we are looking at other solutions. We have some that we are already working through where it would be one to more than one, with more than one proctor. But again, as proctors are not used to this new way of testing, they would need to not only be trained, but work through and be able to do this well. But yes, we are looking at that. But it's not going to be possible to do to test many as you have been doing or able to do in your physical centers. So this is currently one of the limitations of remote testing, but it is nonetheless possible to do the remote testing with this limitation. We are beginning with the following NRS approved tests: reading and math goals for ABE and ASE, and life and work reading for ESL. Then in our phase 2, we will be rolling out I should say in our phase 1, it's a very limited clinical tryout. We have 5 agencies working with us this week, and we are going to open it out to some more programs next week. But then starting on May 4th, we will be able to include more programs around the country in states, again, where the state office has approved remote testing. And that's when we will begin the training process with the proctor webinars, and agencies will submit their agreements. All those things can start happening on May 4th. Once everything's in place, then you may begin to do this testing. And at that point, we hope to also be able to release the ability to for you to use life and work listening. We all, as I mentioned, will be looking at other platforms, one-on-one like GoToMeeting or WebEx, and also proctoring with more than one test taker. So it's coming soon, those other options. And then the third phase, we don't know exactly when that will happen, but as I mentioned, we are exploring with third-party vendors, and if something works out that we think will fly, we will definitely keep you informed. Let me just pause for a second, and if there are any questions, I could perhaps take them now. I did see one which I already did address about the expense, and I did mention that is we're aware of that, but that is an unfortunate situation now, but it is the case. Okay, let me continue then. So our phase 1, I'll tell you a little bit more about it. As you may know, we have a go live process for onboarding with e-tests, and we have now added a go remote process for getting started with CASAS remote testing. So one of the prerequisites is that you have already implemented CASAS e-tests. And if you're not using CASAS now, no, you may not do remote testing. You need to already be set up with CASAS e-tests. And it's not, as I said, possible with paper testing. So that is a very important condition. You must be using CASAS e-tests. There are minimal technical requirements, and I'm going to go over those in just a minute. There is something called the CASAS Remote Testing Agency Agreement that you would need to submit, one per agency. that will tell us how you're going about it and would assure us that you have read the guidelines and that you are agreeing to comply. And then at least any proctors that you're planning to use for this would need to complete the remote proctor training and be certified in remote proctor training. Now, this page, I know there's a lot here, but it's partly to convey that there is a lot to this, and the technical requirements are somewhat considerable. So with this initial rollout configuration, the proctor must have a Windows 10 computer or a Mac with Windows 10 capability. Now, if your proctors don't have that on their own, perhaps the agency can supply them with one, but that is necessary, and that is because the proctor is going to be running e-tests on their computer. And that is so the e-test environment will be secure as it is when you do e-testing in a test center. So Windows 10 is a must for the proctor. The proctor must have a webcam as well as microphone and speakers. With Zoom, it's required for the proctor to have a client, the client app with pro level, and that is just one up from the free account. And the reason for that is because we are requiring you to record, and recording is not possible with the free account. So even if you have a free account that gives you more than 40 minutes, that will not work with this because you need to have the pro level in order to record. And it's only about $15 a month, but each proctor would need to have that. In terms of bandwidth, 2 megabits per second is the download speed that's required. I understand that's not too high a bar. Hopefully that's something you can, that the proctor would be able to manage at home. Now for the test taker, it's more flexible. And that's why we're taking this initial approach with Zoom and one-on-one, is that the test taker can do a Windows 10 laptop or a desktop or a tablet. They could use a Mac desktop or laptop. They could use an iPad with these characteristics. We are looking into Chromebooks. There are some obstacles to that, but we are very close to having a solution for that. So we know that a lot of our adult learners have access to Chromebooks because their students have, their kids have taken them home from, or been given them from their school. So that may be hopefully soon an option that we can also add to this list. The test taker requires a webcam, microphone and speakers. The Zoom client app installed, doesn't have to be the pro level. And then the minimum of 2 megabits of download speed. Okay, the agency remote testing agreement, as I mentioned, it's one per agency. It tells us how you're going to verify the student identity. And it has you agreeing to all of the privacy, test security, technology, and test administration requirements that are detailed in the CASAS remote testing guidelines. This is a picture of that document. It does exist. It's very detailed. It has as all of these agreements in it. It also has very specific instructions for what the proctor does and what they say. So there's information in the beginning about all the requirements and agreements, and then the second part of it goes in detail as to what how the test administration goes. So training tools, there will be webinars so proctors can get trained. This document I just showed you is something that we'll be sharing with you. We're going to be making short how-to videos. We will be coming up with FAQs specific to remote testing. And those will be evolving as well. So those will be, all of these will be on the CASAS website, or the remote testing FAQs will be. We also are planning some other tools for you. In addition to the initial Proctor webinar, there will be follow-up webinars on specific topics. So we'll be scheduling those and making a lot of resources available to you so that you can do this and feel that you're well supported. In these first couple weeks, as we roll out the clinical tryouts and pilot in our phase 1, we are having every agency involved partner with one of our tech support staff. So they will be there to hold their hand, to walk them through and guide them, and very much also to learn from them as they try it out with some actual students. So I see there's a question that what are the options for agencies that only do paper or pencil testing? And I really do want to make very clear that at this point, and probably this is something that would continue, the only option if you're doing paper testing is physical testing. So, and as I mentioned, some programs are finding ways to do that with social distancing. So, but there is no possibility of doing remote testing with paper. I'm sorry. In terms of test preparation and test administration, we have set up a process that is designed to help to make it smoother on testing day and to help the student feel comfortable with this process. So could be the day before the testing day or some time before the actual testing time. We would want the proctor or a program staff to meet with the test taker to confirm that they have the technical requirements that are needed, to go over the test procedures, to preview what's going to happen, answer any questions that they may have to make them feel comfortable with the process. Also, as part of that preparation, the test taker will be informed that the test session will be recorded. And so if the test taker has any concerns about that, and if by chance the test taker is not comfortable with that, then they would have an opportunity to say that no, they're not comfortable with doing this. All right, on testing day, the proctor, who is e-tests and remote testing certified, would set up the tests in e-tests on their Windows 10 computer and would conduct the test one-on-one live via Zoom with remote sharing. And also the proctor would be recording the test session as we said. Let me see if there are any questions that I should address now. I can stop for just a second.
Linda, there was one question about the process before testing day, whether we're envisioning that the proctor would meet face-to-face or that would be something handled remotely or over the phone. Can you clarify that, please?
Well, and Richard, you can chime in here if you like, but I think all of this, when we're talking about our remote testing process, it is assumed that that you're doing this, especially since it's, you know, very labor intensive with the one-on-one process, but we're assuming this would happen remotely. But I mean, if you have a way of doing it face-to-face, that's fine. But we're presuming that this would happen remotely. Just 1 minute, I need to unmute Richard, it seems. Let me try. Okay, Richard.
Hello. No, I'm just going to confirm what you said, Linda. It would have to be remote. I mean, just that's the only way to really give the full experience to the student of how the test session is going to go.
Yes, true. Any other questions from the chat box to answer right now?
Linda, there was a question from an agency that has 2,000 people, users that they're testing, and what the potential solutions are for large numbers.
Well, that is quite a good question, and we don't at the moment have a solution for that. Richard, would you like to? I mean, maybe let's hold it. You know, I'm going to tell you our next other 2 phases, and you'll see what we are planning. But this is not a solution, as I said earlier, where you can have 25 students at a time. So. You know, one thing that we understand that some states or local programs are thinking about is during this crisis is to consider prioritizing who you decide to offer the remote testing to, depending on which students you feel perhaps might be best able to do it, or who you feel are most in need of it. So perhaps you might prioritize your HSE prep students to see if they're ready to take the HSE test. And those students also with better language skills might have an easier time of managing this testing as well. That's just an example. What I'm showing, anything, other questions just to answer right now? Okay, this is just to give you a sense, this is a screenshot from the Proctor's computer screen, and it shows this is with a sample test item on eTests, but as we mentioned, the Proctor is giving the test from their computer, and they're actually sharing their screen through Zoom with the student, so that both the Proctor and the student have the test on their screen. But the Proctor will be able to see the student through the student's webcam, and that way you can see it in the top right corner, can monitor the student and offer help as well during the test. And the student, while they're taking the test, can enter the answers right on their own device. So if it's an iPad, it's a touch screen. If it's not, they can enter it on the keyboard, however they would enter it if they were taking on that device. So that's why this approach is the one we're starting out with, because it is easier for the student to engage with, to work with, and manage with. And we are going to be researching how remote testing works as far as student performance. We're going to have a mechanism for documenting whether a test is being given remotely or later on when you're back in business at a physical test center, and then be able to compare the students' performance in both modes. So we hope that by taking the precautions of having the preparation before the test, getting the student comfortable, and allowing them to use a variety of devices, including those with touch screens from home, that they will be able to do as well as they would do when they're in a physical test session. Let me go on then to phase 2. And this is really just what I was saying before, but just adding other states to not beyond our clinical tryouts, then adding other platforms, and adding more than one test taker, up to, let's say, about 5. Well, we're going to be doing some tryouts with this as well, and we'll see how many students at a time we think we can allow. Richard, anything to comment on there? Okay, and then on to phase 3. This is where we're working with third-party vendors, and if any of those work out, we will definitely let you know. And that may be a way to expand the options and include more test takers at a time. And there may be other options that we haven't even considered yet, where if you know of any that are being used in your program or in your state, please do let us know, because all options are on the table right now. And we, in this time of, I would say, extreme innovation, we are very open to trying whatever could possibly work. We are doing ongoing monitoring and research, and as I mentioned, we're going to have a way of identifying when tests are given remotely and being able then to compare student performance. And another thing we'll be doing with the recordings, we're not going to watch every recording, but we will be spot checking. And in case issues arise, we can look at those recordings to see if there was anything unusual that took place. We also have ways to look at in the back end within TOPS Pro Enterprise to see if there are any irregularities during testing. So that's another way that we can check any violations of test security during the testing. As I mentioned earlier, OCTAE has asked programs, and I'm sure you'll be getting guidance on this from your states, about documenting any students that you were unable to test because of this crisis. And last Wednesday, CASAS, we released a new feature in TOPS Pro Enterprise. It's a new field called unable to test due to force majeure. And what this means is that it's a legal term, that when something outside of our control happens and makes us unable to do something that we were obliged to do, we are exempted from doing that. So this is where you'll be able to enter into TE students that were unable to be tested for this reason. Richard, would you like to comment more on this?
Only that it's there in TE if you want to use it, and we'll be adding some reports later. So if you want to know at the end of the program year how many students you selected as not being able to test, you'll be able to generate a report at that time.
Okay. All right. This is an opportunity for I see we're having a lot of suggestions coming in and some questions, and I'm not sure I can follow them all.
I can start with one, Linda.
Go ahead.
So I saw a few of you asking if you can use existing platforms. Some people have Respondus, other people are using Proctorio. There's potential there, but one of the issues is that eTest also has a lockdown browser and a secure browser by necessity, of course, and it can potentially conflict with those other platforms. So we have to cooperate with each of those vendors and have them install it and do testing and so on. And we've talked to these vendors, Respondus and Proctorio, as well as PSI and Examity and others, and they're so inundated right now that there's a long ramp up time also for anyone new that's getting on board with them. So that's weeks away and not anything immediate. So what we're needing is, for one, to get feedback from the field so we know which vendors to focus on, because we could never put this on all vendors. There's dozens actually that offer this right now. So if we see that there's a commonality of something, like, and maybe it's Respondus or Proctorio, we'll try to work with them, but they're already telling us that it's not something that can be immediate.
Mm-hmm. I see we have a few questions about what about if you're in the process of becoming an eTest user, going through the certifications and other things, or if you'd like to start using eTests and then be able to do remote testing. That is something that we certainly encourage you to complete your certifications. Now is a great time to onboard in eTests if you were not able to do it before, and like us, you can see this is a wave of the future. So we encourage you to complete that process. We may be able to work with you if you haven't tried out eTests and had experience with it in the much easier physical context. We do know from our own experience that it can be challenging to take on both learning to give eTests and then adding on another more complicated piece to it. So, but if you're determined and you have pretty good tech skills, then we could consider working with you on that. So I don't want to say it's not possible. I just do want to say that it's a lot to take on at once. But I also want to encourage everyone, if you're not already using eTests and you're still using paper, and you possibly can transition to eTests, that now is a very good time to do that. Somebody's commented about recordings, and that is something that we are requiring currently. We are going to provide some guidance about how you might be able to manage those recordings, because we understand that that can be cumbersome, to say the least. And we know that there are student privacy issues that need to be considered with that. So we will be providing guidance, and we understand that it's a little bit unwieldy, but we, at the moment, as we're just getting into this, we want to ensure that we have a safety net of test security, and that is one way that we feel we can do that. We did consider other options, like having a second camera positioned on the side to get a better view of what's happening in the room and on the student's keyboard, etc. But that is even more cumbersome, and we thought would be even more challenging to implement. So that's where we are right now with the recording requirement.
Linda? I've noticed that there's a lot of questions also about the use of Zoom, and Linda may have said this, but I'll say again that we're starting with Zoom, but we're not in any way restricting use of Zoom. So we realize there's a lot of web conferencing software out there, and we're looking at Microsoft Teams and Google Meet and WebEx and so on. And we foresee that you could probably use any of these other web conferencing tools, but in order to start out with some standardization and give directions to proctors, we are starting with Zoom. But Linda, you can say more if you have ideas of how long we would use it.
I don't know. I think we'll just have to play that by ear. I think it's certainly how we're starting out, and then we'll see if other solutions emerge that work better, or we can, as I mentioned, we are planning to look at other options of other video conferencing platforms that, or if you know of others that your state is using that we haven't considered yet, we can look into them. So we aren't, by any means, we're not limiting ourselves to Zoom, but we are, that is in the long term or even midterm, but in the short term, we are limiting ourselves to Zoom. Janice or Christine, any other questions?
Janice, I'm typing furiously. Hang on.
Yeah, and this is Christine. Yes, in response to the questions coming in about future forward training for proctors, just two things. As Linda mentioned, it will be a video training that CASAS will be providing, a series of those trainings for the initial certification for remote testing. Just to follow up on what Linda said, as well as the question that came in about should they be training locally. The answer to that question is no. CASAS will be providing a remote testing proctor certification that will be required for implementation of remote testing.
Thank you. Well, I think Janice and Christine have been trying to answer questions as they can, and we may have missed some. So as I mentioned earlier, we will compile all of your questions and what we've been doing with these monthly webinars, and this one is, I think, in particularly important. We've always pulled together a document where we compile all the questions and we provide answers. And in many cases, we provide links to solutions or answers that are on our CASAS website. So we will definitely do that for all your great questions that have come up today. And I also want to share with you that if you are interested in remote testing, I want to again emphasize that it has to do, first of all, with what your state is planning. So when your state is ready, and you know, that will vary, but when your state is ready with a plan to implement remote testing and gives you as a local program the go-ahead to pursue it, then we would need to have been in touch with the state to know that that is fine with them, because we don't want to act in a way that might in any way be against state policy. So our process is to ensure that the state is okay with it, and if so, understanding how they plan to proceed, you know, we would recommend that it would be good to pilot at, you know, with some select agencies perhaps to begin with. This is going to be challenging, as you can imagine, for us to go to scale overnight here. So we're going to ask you to be patient, and we can roll it out as quickly as we can, but it might be useful if there are some pilot sites in states to get it started and make sure it's working with all the conditions and requirements you have for your state. But if you would like to be a pilot, and again, we have to limit the pilots next week, but if you would like to, or if you would think you might like to roll out, and you do already know that your state is going to be implementing remote testing, then do contact us at remotetesting@casas.org. That's a special email address that we've set up to respond. But if you just have a very what should I say? If you haven't contacted your state yet, please do that first, and then after that, we're happy to interact and support you as much as we possibly can. So we're ready to assist you when the time is right. We do have another one of these webinars next month. We may perhaps schedule another one before that if we have anything more to tell you. Everything seems to be accelerated these days, so what we used to do in 1 week, we seem to be doing differently every day. So, and so we may schedule one before this. If we do, we will post it on our CASAS website in the What's New section. So also, we have been posting updates on the CASAS response with remote testing during the COVID-19 pandemic. So please stay tuned there on the CASAS website. Every Friday, pretty much, we've been putting up an update on what we're offering, what we're doing, what's new, and we've also archived our previous updates there. So that's another place to stay up to date about what's going on. Any other questions to answer at this point? We are recording this session, and we'll be posting the recording and the PowerPoint PDF, as well as the chat box responses on the CASAS website. If you go to the home page of casas.org, on the far right side, it says What's New, and under that it says National News and Updates. So that's where you'll find it. If you didn't enter your name and agency and email, you could do it now. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for attending. We really are very happy to partner with you during this very unusual time. We've been doing this for 40 years and we are always learning. This is another opportunity, and we are so glad that you are willing to partner with us as we move ahead to ensure this new level of assessment, this new mode, and to still make CASAS a very quality form of testing in the field. So thank you so much. We look forward to working with you. I'll just clarify that the PDF and the PowerPoint will be posted shortly. The recording takes a little bit of time to process in Zoom, and as soon as we get that, we will put it onto the website.